Well, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Sheena Parsons. Sheena, she got her bachelor's degree at Texas A&M. Then she went to K-State to work with Tony Jern's lab as a technician, and then she transitioned to master's work and finished a really nice master's project focused on grassland distributions, ecology, and ecophysiology. And then she came to Lawrence to work in my lab. I hired her, and she did a great job keeping my lab afloat for a number of years. Then she went on and briefly worked in the Beaver Schultz lab before she was hired as a full-time staff member at the field station. And it wasn't long after that before she became the field station manager. And those of you that know Sheena, she wears many hats. And among some of the things she's responsible for, she's heavily involved in the day-to-day management of the field station, works closely with researchers to help facilitate what they do out there, works closely with staff on land management and stewardship, is involved in all kinds of public engagement events like we just saw this last weekend. She likes to burn stuff. Sheena is a highly trained professional fire ecologist, and she's trained in prescribed fire management. And since she took over that role at the field station, she's really elevated that and extended what we do in terms of fire management, both in terms of efficacy and safety. And it's been a huge asset in that regard. She is also involved in her own research, and she has developed and cultivated a number of collaborators, and I think we're going to hear about some of that today. All right, so yeah. Sheena.
Thanks, Brian. So I just want to check real quick and make sure that everybody can hear on Zoom. And I don't see anything, so I think we're good. Okay, so thank you, Brian, for that introduction. It's kind of hard to believe that I've been at KU for that much time, but time is a thief. So for today's talk, like Brian said, I wear a lot of hats. So thinking about what I would like to share with you all, I figured that I would focus on some of the fun projects, or what I think are fun projects that I've been engaged in. But before we do that, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, I kind of want to just give a real brief introduction to field stations in general. So not everybody may know what a field station is, and it's really these places where you can study or natural processes or physical properties, and really it can be done at any scale and through any discipline. The natural world inspires research in a lot of different fields, and this can be sort of on the microscopic or molecular level, extend out more broadly to entire ecosystem. And this can be done sort of at snapshots, research projects, really investigating moments in time, or across broader time scales. And field stations exist all over the world. And so this is a map that the Organization of Biological Field Stations has collected information about these different field stations all over the place. And they really range in sort of how they identify. There's for-profit field stations, like small, privately owned lands, public lands, nonprofit organizations. They can be affiliated with government agencies or a lot of educational institutions like our field station. And so the University of Kansas field station, we are the university's field station. And when we talk about the field station, what we're really referring to are sort of these three generalized areas within Eastern Kansas. And so we have what we consider to be our core research area up and around Lawrence. We kind of are in where the three counties, Jefferson, Leavenworth, and Douglas County meet. And then we have a forest preserve. And then we also manage a prairie preserve. And so collectively, this is a whole spectrum of different land types, grasslands from native and undisturbed or unbroken systems to highly influenced by humans through agriculture, We have woodlands, forests, and then we have a variety of different ponds and tanks. And so our field station really got started as the KU Natural History Reservation 75 years ago. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary recently. And so in 1947, Raymond Hall persuaded the chancellor to take back what was Robinson pasture at the time, a working farm, and use that more for a place of study. Let plants and animals do their thing, be in a natural state, and it could be a place where we could observe them. And so 1948, they hired Henry S. Fitch as the first superintendent of that 590-acre parcel. And so then soon that was established as the, this natural history reservation, a place to, they applied this broad treatment of excluding human intervention and just sort of watched what was going to happen. And so Henry Fitch watched this all unfold for basically his entire adult life and career, beyond retirement. And so in the 1980s, the reservation name was changed to the Fitch Reservation to recognize his dedication to that place, and all of the discoveries and all of the people that he taught along the way. And so that Fitch Reservation is part of what we consider to be our core research area. And this is really a collection of lands that came to the university over time. And so today we're looking at about 1,600 acres. And again, this is like full spectrum of land use histories. Some parcels that are like untouched or unbroken soils, native prairies, old hay fields, old crop fields, successional growth, woodlands, some forested areas, like you name it, we've probably got a spot where that land use history is represented. So this is also where sort of our research infrastructure is. And so we've got greenhouse space, laboratory space, tanks and ponds, and you can see Jerry's happy place out there. And so the other sort of really powerful, or like what I feel that we bring to the table is that because we are a place that has seen disturbance, like human disturbance, that gives us a lot of flexibility to sort of build out research experiments. Like we don't have to worry quite as much about, being the first like breaking of that soil, or we have spaces that have already seen disturbance, so we can manipulate those areas for experimentation a little more readily. And that can be, it's harder and harder to find, right? And in the name of conservation, we try to protect the few bits of land remaining. And so we're able to do this at our field station. We also host the National Ecological Observatory Network. We are one of, I think, 48 terrestrial sites. And so what this means is that if you're unfamiliar with the NEON program, it is funded by the National Science Foundation, operated by Battelle, and they collect the same suite of data across all of their sites across the nation. And so that allows you to sort of make these direct comparisons because they are following strict protocols across these broad ecosystems across the state. And so that is our core research area. If we travel a little bit farther south, you would run into the Baldwin Woods Forest Preserve. And so this place is, we're up to protecting about 460 acres of forest woodland areas. And this is in southeastern Douglas County. And so it's a collection of reserves that, this is what makes it really special is that this is the westernmost extent of the eastern deciduous forest. So these are old growth hardwood forests that exist right here in Kansas. So if you travel a little bit farther south beyond that, you would find the Nature Conservancy's Anderson County Prairie Preserve. And so we manage this property for the Nature Conservancy. They're up to about 1,200 acres of land down in Anderson County. It's slightly more arid prairie than what we have up here in northeastern Kansas. But this is sort of fulfills that sort of working range component. There are cattle that graze there. And so there are old hay meadows. And so it's still sort of in that that form of agricultural or range management. This particular site is also home to one of the nation's, arguably the world's largest populations of meats milkweed as well. So this is one of the motivations for why the Nature Conservancy hangs on and preserves this property. So that's the quick and dirty of what makes when we're talking about the KU Field Station. Those are some of the places that you could visit. And so for the rest of this talk, I wanted to focus on just a couple of different projects, like Bryan mentioned. I've collaborated with a number of people across the campus. One of them, Dr. Hyun Chow, which I've presented with him in this series and in various places before. So today, I'm not going to focus really on that drone work, but kind of share with you some of the projects that maybe some of you are less aware of. So that first project is one that's pretty exciting to me and hopefully a lot of other people. This project to return fire back to the Baldwin Woods Forest Preserve. And this has been a conversation that started probably well before I came to KU. But over my time here with the survey at the field station, it's just been a reemerging conversation. And so, and the Baldwin Woods Forest Preserve, so Oak Hickory Forest, right? It's this magical place. And I was realizing when I was putting this talk together, I have a lot of spring heavy pictures of Baldwin Woods, and I need to do a lot better job of capturing the rest of the year because it's pretty magical any time of year. But for whatever reason, these tiny little flowers just make you take pictures of them all the time. So, but yeah, Oak Hickory Forest, oaks, fire adapted species. We know historically all of our forests and woodlands in this area would have been much more open than they are today. And so one of the reasons why things are sort of closing in, we have this with fire suppression, we have this accumulation of litter that is holding moisture a little bit longer. And, that leads to this process known as mesification. So we have these pockets that are building up that moisture layer, and then we're starting to shift who likes to be there. And so oaks like dry periods, they need more sunlight, warmer soils, hitting the soil to be able to grow. They need more open space in the canopy. Whereas when you're not removing that litter layer, you can start to favor other species like hackberries and elms and in our area, redbuds and some maples, and then hophorn bean. And so with that absence of fire, we're shifting the community. And so this conversation of, well, how do we reintroduce fire? We realized, so the field station is a staff of 4 people. One of those is our education program coordinator. So we're down to 3 people. And I'm not excluding you on purpose, Bryan, but functionally what we're doing out there on a day-to-day basis on the management side of things, we've got these 3 people that are really boots on the ground. And so January 2020, right before the world changed, we all finally made it out. We had partners from Kansas Forest Service, thinking about this conversation with us. what's the feasibility of, introducing fire, what that would look like. And so it took a little bit of time, but eventually we formalized that relationship, this partnership to really develop this plan. Kansas Forest Service really took the lead and helped us develop like a legit fire plan for the Baldwin Woods Forest Preserve, what the kind of preparation would look like, how we would roll out the fire, some of the monitoring, the whole deal. And so thinking about the Baldwin Woods Forest Preserve, there's a lot of topography involved. There's some homes in the area. There are just some complications. And so figuring out the location to have that first fire introduced, we kind of focused on the rice woodland. It's pretty flat. It's an 80-acre parcel. It is the one that is on the eastern side of the county highway. So in some ways, it's, it was the safest environment to try this burn. And so first step for that project, we had to create these fire breaks because we're trying to contain the fire only in a very specific area. And woodland burns take a lot of time because they've got various loads of fuels. And so they burn a lot longer. It's very different than just broadcasting like a grass fire when those fuels fully consume within an hour. These are 10-hour, 100-hour fuels. And so it takes a lot of time to execute that burn. First step was creating those containment units. And so we had to create some fire breaks. You can kind of see on this map here. So there are these black lines. And so, this is very blurry, sorry. So creating these breaks, we had to do some saw work. And so the cool thing about this collaboration with Kansas Forest Service is they follow the like National Wildland Fire certifications. And so chainsaw certifications are a part of that whole organizational or certification process on the wildland fire crews. So they were able to recruit some folks who had open task books for various qualifications and come out and get those skill days to help us build these fire breaks. And a lot of people in this room also helped as well. And so we put in the work days, we got these fire breaks, things were looking good. But then the thing about woodland burns is it's a real test of patience. And so waiting for that weather, having it line up with crew availability takes a whole other set of patience. Eventually, we did finally get to that moment, and we were able to gather everybody. We lit our test fire, everything looked good, and we finally were able to burn Baldwin Woods. And so we could not have done it without the collaboration with the Kansas Forest Service. Through their network, they are the state fire agency. Through their network, they were able to bring along various like wildland certified firefighters from local surrounding fire departments. There were students there. There were community members from Lawrence and Baldwin City that were volunteering for the event, and then people from KBS and the field station. And collectively, I think on burn day, we had about 50 people on site for that burn. So Kansas Forest Service stayed around. They did mop up with us and just maintained those fire lines. It took an additional 2 days just to make sure that everything was secure. And so we can finally say, thanks to all of these people, that we were able to reintroduce fire back into that forest ecosystem at Baldwin Woods. So, pretty cool project. This next bit is going to seem like quite the pivot, but just hang with me. The virtual field is this cool program that kind of emerged during the pandemic. Originally, it was funded through a rapid grant. And so there were a group of people that all knew each other through engagement in the organization of biological field stations that, so all field station people really trying to figure out what the heck does it mean to like still be able to share field stations or have that field component when people can't travel. And so it was originally funded as a rapid, like I said, and it kind of included these virtual experiences, um, dropping into these different field stations through a few different avenues. And so they created these ecosystem exploration videos. They hosted a series of live from the field events, which engaged ecologists, researchers who were recording videos, talking to people about the work that they do from their field site. And then it was paired with a live Zoom Q&A. And then there were also links back to field stations and whatever content they had available already. And then there was this 360 video component that collects videos at each solstice and equinox throughout the year. So you get sort of to drop in and see what the place looks like throughout the seasons. And so I had the privilege of participating in, the program got another leg of funding from the NSF through the Research Communication Network, undergraduate biology education. And so the virtual field has really been able to sort of grow into a broader network that helps to really kind of try to break down those barriers in accessibility through, not everybody can go and visit a field site or feels comfortable visiting a field site. So it's just another way to sort of share these field experiences with a very diverse group of audience members. And so through my participation with that RCN, everybody, we're all contributing network. I participated as a content creator, as a field station manager. There's also a faculty side of things that helps to develop different modules that kind of pair with some of these videos. And so I was trying to think about what kind of project could sort of maybe help with some of the questions that I think about daily. So some of these applied or land management questions. And so I created some 360 videos, and these were both paired site videos. And so there's a prairie set and then a woodland or forest set. And so strategically, I placed my forest camera sites in a burned and unburned site. And so these are 360 videos. And if you go to the Organization of Biological Field Stations YouTube site, that's where all these videos are hosted. You could click on them and you can pan around. And so it's a recording, so you can get all of the sights and sounds in that recording period. And you can kind of look wherever you want to. So you can get a pan of the sky or, watch whatever you want to watch. And so they're really great at helping students sort of like hone their observation skills. And you can create, different guided lessons to help them sort of really hone those skills. But they could also potentially be really great resources, thinking of like field ecology or something as a site introduction before you even get out into the field. So sort of like a pre-lab exercise dropping into that site. So if I tried to open them here, it would crash the Zoom, but because these are like massive files. But you can kind of see I've got some snapshots from those videos of the burn track and then the unburned site. And you can set, this is anecdotal observational data. We didn't collect monitoring data pre-burn, unfortunately, hindsight. But so we have this sort of visual way to follow, like, what's the burn like impact looking like. So yeah, you can kind of see we eliminated some of that litter layer, and it's a little less woolly during the growing season. And it was a little bit of a rainy day in September, so it's a little harder to kind of tease things out. But as a person who walks through to get to those sites, there are very stark differences on how easily you can get to the unburned versus the burnt, or the burned versus the unburned site. So we now have this way, we've had this burn, and now we have this way where people can kind of virtually experience the two different tracks. But another exciting news, soon we'll have a public trail thanks to some funding through the open space money from the Douglas County Heritage Conservation Council. So we've got some public trails that are going to be installed in Rice Woodland. We'll have a parking lot so that we won't have to clog up the road when we have events out there or when classes visit, safe places for kids to get on and off buses. So people will be able to immerse themselves and see firsthand as well, sort of what those two different tracks look like. Okay, so the next project that I would like to highlight, so many of you have probably experienced this project. So this is an artwork, an art collaboration. And this was really, so Joey Orr, formerly he ran the Integrated Arts Research Initiative at the Spencer Museum. He has since moved on to another position. But so through this program, he recruited Janine Antoni as one of their artists through this program. And so she has an incredible body of work. Her website is amazing. You should go check out her work. But this project specifically was a sort of, so she wanted to create this immersive experience and was also inspired by the shape of the human anatomy of the ear. And so her idea was to embed this labyrinth shaped like an ear on the landscape. And it's essentially formed by people walking it. And so we didn't use any equipment to carve out these trails. These were just walked in, like guided walks and just repeated walking. So essentially like a human game trail. And so the process in which that was translated from a drawing onto the landscape, we engaged, we collaborated with Keith Vanderreet and his design build studio to sort of use architectural surveying skills, and we gridded everything out, and then we drew the picture onto the landscape. And it was a process, and but the really cool part of this project, so it's an immersive experience, and it guides people into the tall. Not a lot of people experience that. We like to be on curated paths and, not fully in it. And as a person who spends more time out in the field than others, there's some cool parts to that. You get to see bugs up close. You get to feel what different plants feel like. There's some bad parts about that too. But so it's the whole immersive experience though, where you start to kind of learn the land and reconnect with the land. And so that is a project that sort of, through artistic processes, it's incorporating some restoration practices in that artwork. And that's the part that I think has been the coolest, sharing those experiences with people. Not only has this brought very different perspectives to the field station through the reach of the Spencer community, the students that have visited through different classes, but there have been opportunities to incorporate and connect people with sort of what restoration practices are involved with sort of the broader, managing the landscape surrounding where the labyrinth exists. And so some of those we have, there has been a fire component. And so introducing people to what fire culture means. And, there's been 2 burns now. Hopefully we'll have a 3rd one November 2nd. That sort of has this demonstration of fire on the landscape, inviting others to participate in that process as well. It's also given us the opportunity, one of those fields is incredibly infested with Johnson grass. And so it's given us the opportunity to have some creative moments of like, and some of this is by design, like the restoration process is long and it has a lot of like head scratching involved sometimes. And sometimes we're trying things, but the selling point that we're trying to connect people to the process, and sometimes slowing down and sort of like getting to know that species that you're dealing with is pretty cool. And it opens people's eyes in a different way. And so we've incorporated these different opportunities, invited people out to, we tilled this field because it was so infested with Johnson grass. And so we spent some time pulling rhizomes out because it's an incredibly resilient species that can grow from these broken parts in the soil. So as a curiosity, what happens if we take those rhizomes out? Like, could we exhaust some of that from like the site? Like, would that help with establishing seeds? So we brought people out, and surprisingly, like people were really into digging out those rhizomes from the soil. It's almost like, you know how like when you're doing a puzzle and you just want one more piece, just one more little bit, and then you find a big juicy chunk and it's just like keeps you going. So if anybody ever wants to dig rhizomes. So then after we took some of those rhizomes out, we invited people to then spread some seed with us. And so this gives the people the chance to see what, you know, like this tiny little seed turns into this plant. And while it seems like something that we think about all the time, or maybe we don't because we just know that plants come from seeds, but it gives you that like reminder that, dang, like this is, we're putting this seed there and it's growing into this plant in this field, and we're doing that. So this opportunity, like, yeah, just connecting people in that way. And then we've invited people out throughout the period to kind of check in and see what's happening. And, you know, some of this may seem like it's just storytelling. We're just trying to find ways to, you know, keep the dialogue going. And that's totally true, because we often forget that things don't happen overnight. And so just having these reminders that, you know, like this whole process is a process. So, but all along the way, ultimately, kind of what we're doing is we're trying to like build that hope, like let people know that like there is still hope. Just don't throw your hands up if it doesn't seem to be going your way right away. We just have to figure out what the next step is. And so hopefully, I don't know, hopefully you guys are as excited about some of these projects as I have been. Like I said, these are what I consider to be sort of the fun parts of my job. It's sort of like connecting people with those more applied skills, like on the landscape, sharing that knowledge, building that collective knowledge together is one of the cool things that makes our field station and other field stations pretty cool places to work every day. And so with that, I will also just put a plug here. This is also a project that is funded through HCC. We have a burn workshop that is coming up in a couple weeks, where the hope is that we could share a little bit more about fire, cultural, you know, practices, and just sort of helping to develop those skill sets, and that way we could have more fire on the landscape too. And then we'll follow with, hopefully with weather permitting, another cultural fire demonstration on November 2nd. So if you all have the space, we would love to have you. So that's all I've got for today. So questions would welcome.